would love for Megan just to maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for reaching out and allowing us to share about our successes using Atlas as part of our reaccreditation process. So, as Amy said, my name is Megan Kimpton. I am the head of school here at the Meridian School in Seattle, Washington. This is my third year at the school, but my first year as head. I spent the last 2 years as assistant head of school, and prior to that, I have been a classroom teacher, worked in and out of nonprofits, and also led a charter school in New York City. So a lot of different ways to look at schools in my background. I'm very excited to be leading Meridian now. As soon as I arrived 2 years ago, my predecessor, the current head of school at that time, announced that we would immediately be going into our self-study for reaccreditation, which was a new process for me. I was both excited about it as a learning opportunity for me and the school, but also thought that it could be a slightly daunting challenge. So I'd like to share with you today how we went through that process from the curricular standpoint using our Atlas. And so I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about what our accreditation body does for going through that process in terms of it being in an 8-year cycle. So some accrediting bodies follow slightly different processes throughout the country. So I strongly encourage you, if you don't already know yours inside and out, to make sure that you do, because they might be slightly different than what I share here today. And so our accrediting body goes through an 8-year cycle. As you approach the end of that cycle, approximately a year and a half before the visiting team comes to your school, you begin a structured self-study reflection, which is a quite substantial document that you write as a school, identifying your areas of growth, and then also having that team come and benefiting from your peer schools being able to look at your program and also identifying strengths and challenges. There is a predetermined set of standards and kind of substandards, or what our body calls indicators, that really prescribe all of the different things that that team and ultimately the accrediting body's board of governors are going to review in terms of giving you accreditation or re-accreditation in our case. So our school has been accredited throughout its entire history, and so this is just an 8-year re-accreditation that we went through that finished at the end of last school year. And so in that prescribed standards and indicators, there is a set of questions that help you to kind of think through where your school is at and where it really needs to go in that next 8-year cycle. And so these set of questions and indicators then allow the accrediting body to make the decision about whether or not you will gain that accreditation for that next cycle. And so it is really within the school's purview in our body to determine your overall readiness for that. I know for us, we took 1 extra year in that 8-year cycle before we started our self-study this last time in order to be as prepared as possible, given a lot of the transitions in leadership and different programmatic changes that were happening in the school. And so our visit was in March of 2017. We actually began writing our self-study in February of 2016, so about a 13-month process to write, review, edit, and publish our self-study. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that looked like in terms of our own community and writing that program piece. And then once that is written and it's determined that your school is fully ready for that accreditation visit, a group of educators came in that 3-day visit in March and looked to really see if our program was matching what they read in the self-study. They then write a report that makes a recommendation about our reaccreditation, and then we are responsible for writing a response to that within 2 years of the actual visit and how we are using that information to forward our school. And so just a little bit about where we started. We took on an ambitious curriculum mapping project that actually started 2 years prior to even beginning the self-study. And our board generously approved funds in order to allow us to map the entire curriculum of the school. It was quite an undertaking, and so Atlas was chosen as the vehicle for us to map that, and we got lots of support actually from Amy and others in getting that process up and running, and spent a lot of time with teachers just literally housing what we did in one central location. And Atlas was pretty transformative for us in that way. The curriculum had not really been written down in a form that could be easily accessed and have the flexibility to be revised and changed on a regular basis. And so really not only helped us in this project, but was a catalyst in allowing our curriculum to move ahead in a lot of great ways over the last few years. And so it was really a 2-year process in the 2014-15 school year and 2015-16 to really map the entire math, science, and social studies curriculum. We were in the process of adopting a new literacy and language arts program, and so we put that on the back burner while we helped start getting that up and running with professional development and helping teachers start to plan that. And so as we implemented the writing curriculum in 2016 and 2017, we really focused on putting that into Atlas at that time. And then this year we're really working on mapping. And then I think a great piece of this is also that we are starting to cycle back and look at what major revisions are going to look like in content areas, kind of one step at a time.
Great. Megan, I just had a couple questions actually come in as you were sharing kind of your timeline. The first question was, how did you approach mapping the subjects? Did you spend like 1 year and have everybody map math and then the next year science? Were teachers mapping them all at the same time? What did that process look like?
Sure. So that process actually started the year before I arrived at the school, and it really was just because of the sheer volume was a let's put everything that we currently do in right now and come back and revise. In hindsight and after coming on, I would probably recommend building one at a time. I think that would help overall with some investment. It was a huge workload for our teachers, and through kind of the funds that we were able to receive from the board, we did compensate them for some of that extra time. However, doing all subjects at one time was a huge lift, and I think that doing one, building it at a slower pace would be helpful. So thinking about when your accreditation visit is, I also think that when the visiting team was here, they appreciated seeing a lot of it in progress and liked to see that we were thinking about it as kind of more of a stepwise project. So if you're thinking about trying to get everything done before they come, I think there are also advantages to them seeing the system being built, the curriculum map being built in Atlas as you go.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point. I know when we work with schools, that kind of push to get it all done sometimes causes a lot of stress, and as we know, that the curriculum development process is always evolving and changing, and so it's okay for that accrediting body to see that. One other question came in through that chat window. Just want to remind everybody they can use that chat window in the top right of their screen to ask questions for Megan throughout the whole webinar. The question came through, were teachers writing the curriculum themselves, or was it prescribed by the administration?
So we have a little bit of both. So we use a prescribed out-of-the-box, for lack of a better term, math program, but we still ask them to map that. And then social studies and science are a bit more organic in that teachers are writing that curriculum. However, they had already done a lot of that work ahead of actually mapping that into Atlas, so it was more about consolidating kind of that binder mentality, for lack of a better term, into into the online system that is Atlas. Okay,
great. All right, thank you so much for answering those questions. I'll keep them coming as they come in, Megan.
Great. So if we just continue on, I wanted to show some examples of what our kind of mapping style looks like. So we were using largely an understanding by design template, and so had all of the standards pre-populated in there. By and large, we use Common Core standards for our benchmarks in math and literacy and language arts, and then we use kind of a variety of different standards groups, the NGSS and some other standards that are more geared towards our specialists' content areas, and I think that's another great piece of Atlas is the way that you can integrate and kind of move across those standards so that that can be seen throughout our curriculum maps of how everything kind of ties together. I think that was another thing that the accrediting team called out for us, was being able to see that integration and having that kind of pre-built into our system for our teachers both to use but also to show an emphasis on that throughout the different grades and content areas. And so this is just the second half of our template done in a screenshot, so you can just see how it really follows large parts of the understanding by design philosophy of backwards planning. I wanted to just show also and put this out there as I think a strong example of a style guide that I think is great for us to be able to have housed in Atlas so that teachers can access that at any time. And so one important piece of this mapping process was really to ensure consistency, because one of the reasons that we were undertaking this whole process was to allow better articulation across grade levels so that we could have a much more consistent and coherent scope and sequence. And so the style guide has figured largely in that process in helping all of the maps look, I won't say exactly the same because that's something that we're kind of continually working on, but very similar, and that each grade level and each map have all of the same components so that then we can use the great features in Atlas that help us look at those things across grade levels, and also allowed us to create kind of a public-facing portion of our larger Atlas system so that the visiting team actually had access to all of our maps at any point in time, but we were also able to be a bit specific about the different pieces that they were looking at so that they could really focus in kind of on the content and skills and scope and sequence, but had access in this way, but we were able to kind of control the pieces that they were able to see, but also gave them huge amounts of visibility into those most important pieces of Atlas that would help them best come to their commendations and recommendations for us when it came to curriculum. So
another question just came in about the style guide. Where did you get this style guide? Was it something that you created yourself in-house?
So I believe that we started with a template that you gave us, Amy, but that we ultimately put our own individual stamp on so that it was meridian specific to the things that we were looking for in our maps, and kind of right down to very granular things around were we going to use bullets and how descriptive were skills and content going to be and where were adjectives. And so we got very, very specific with how we wanted those maps to look, and then layered that into our style guides so that we could ensure for as much consistency as possible.
And Megan, I noticed on the slide before that you actually have your style guide embedded as a link on your unit planning template right there at the top.
We do, yep.
Was that helpful for teachers to have that style guide linked right there so as they're planning they could reference, you know, that guide?
Extremely helpful. I think that when teachers are in here in writing mode, they have that open kind of with it, but it's always right there, so they don't ever have to go and search for it. So that has been extremely helpful and even easy to suggest if it's not being followed as consistently as we'd like, to remind them that it's linked right there for them to use.
Great. All right, thank you for answering our questions.
Sure. So this, again, our public, so this was public to the visiting team, I should say, and then this is also allowing us to kind of layer in another parent-facing curriculum guide that we are going to create and have on our website.
On your school website?
Yes, I'm sorry, on our school website.
Okay. Great. So this is just for some of those of you who maybe are a little confused. With Atlas, there is the capability to create a public-facing site of your curriculum. And as Megan said, your school went through the process of deciding what you wanted to share, and you had kind of in the end in mind of this would be what the accrediting body would use to review your curriculum. But as you said, you know, it can definitely be something that parents could use, or even prospective teachers that are interested in working at your school.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great.
so we focus largely on essential questions, skills and content, and assessment pieces, so that nobody had to worry about, you know, wading through entire learning plans for units, that they had all of the information that they really needed quickly at their fingertips.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
And so how Atlas really specifically supported us in the self-study process is that there are several, these are examples of some of those key indicators that we had to be able to demonstrate that we were successful. And so first is providing a mission-aligned curriculum, and I kind of made a joke about the binder mentality around that, but without Atlas, we would have had to hand produce as many binders as it would have taken to share our actual curriculum. And because we had taken the time to actually work through kind of the, you know, pain, but also the glory of getting everything into Atlas, we were able to just hand that off and probably have it in a much more complete and detailed manner than it would be if we were kind of controlling for a paper curriculum. And so we were able to show them how our curriculum was mission aligned. And also, I think it showed them the areas where we still need to work, none of which were necessarily a surprise for us, but did that. And so, obviously, the written curriculum, which I think sometimes can be so challenging when teachers hold so many things in their head or have it in their own planner and haven't necessarily put it out in a form that can be shared with everyone. And so this literally, we have the written curriculum to back up everything that we are doing and can house that for everybody to access in Atlas. And then this is an area that we're still working on that they called out for us, but what does that review and revision of each component look like? But one thing that I know we'll see here in a minute that they did actually commend us for is because of the way that it is in Atlas, that it is flexible and changeable in a very dynamic way.
Excellent.
And so as you saw, we had the secure version of the map, and so we didn't have to recreate or reprint or collate and assemble those binders. We also, so we have kind of one person that's designated as what we call our self-study coordinator as part of our process, who is kind of our liaison between us and the accrediting body and helps organize the process here for us, who is actually an in-house staff member who had other jobs in addition to self-study coordinator. But this also allowed for very easy feedback on maps that already existed. And so in the parts that she was writing about our actual curriculum and program, she could give feedback on the maps. She could access the maps to answer any of the questions that she was writing that might not have been kind of content area specific, and so just allowed her a lot more flexibility in being able to create that substantial self-study document.
Megan, how was she providing feedback? Was she doing it directly in Atlas? Was she meeting with teachers after reviewing their maps? What did that look like?
I think a little bit of both. I think the features that are in Atlas to be able to leave messages to provide feedback were certainly helpful in that way, especially with the amount of time that she was spending kind of in there looking for everything, looking for consistency and detail, and so certainly would leave messages that way, but also everybody could get in the room, put Atlas up on a screen, and kind of have that collective, collaborative conversation around it, and then also make changes right there in the room that were long-lasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question just came through that is kind of more towards the next steps for you, but have you been able to set aside time for teachers to adapt and change entries in Atlas now that your accreditation has been done, and what kind of time are you dedicating? Someone is looking ahead, so what are your next steps, it sounds like?
Definitely, yep. So was going to talk a little bit about that, but I can answer that specific question right now in terms of, you know, time is always everybody's largest need. And so in thinking about these things and me moving into head of school and having a new assistant head of school, really looking at where are the times and places that we can do that. And so my assistant head of school has kind of restructured planning time with the teachers so that they are more specifically looking at different content areas, have Atlas open right there, and are making changes kind of as they have the conversation. And so that was one of our goals all along, was to make Atlas a more dynamic piece of what teachers, or I should say how teachers are planning curriculum, both on a daily basis and a unit basis. And so we're also looking at times like staff meetings periodically being kind of what we call like Atlas work times or collaborative planning. We've done work at some of our professional development days. We'll take chunks of those and work on a specific piece of curriculum planning and then give teachers time to actually make the changes and revise Atlas. So we have to be really cognizant of making the time for that to happen and kind of holding people accountable for that so that those changes do happen on a regular basis.
Yeah, another question came in, and this is one that I think we hear a lot, and I think definitely is something you could speak to. You know, kind of wondering how teachers felt. Did they feel like mapping was a good investment? You know, were they able to see how it helped with the accreditation process and helped them as teachers, or did it feel more like kind of something that was coming from top down in terms of accountability?
Right. I think this is kind of a constant struggle in this area. So I think it was a little bit of both. I think the way that the process started, kind of the let's just get it all in, felt like a bit of an exercise in futility. I think that now in hindsight, having seen how successful our accreditation process was and how much the team actually relied on Atlas to make their kind of inferences and decisions about how things were going on the curriculum level, definitely helped them see more investment. I think more importantly than that is now that we are saying, okay, we're going to use this all of the time, we're going to reference it, we're going to look into it, we're going to give you feedback in it. So I think it's been an evolution. I think it does feel like a huge amount of work for not a whole lot of payoff at the beginning for teachers until, you know, it's kind of that old adage of teacher action leads to teacher belief. And so the more that they use it and see how we are asking them to use it, the more that they are finding the features and the ways that they can employ it on a much more frequent basis than just a yearly kind of let's dump everything in there because they say we have to.
And did you engage, you know, I guess teacher leaders or have some sort of kind of team so that you had buy-in at kind of a teacher level?
We do have a team that's kind of evolving that is our curriculum committee. And initially when this process began, they were kind of tasked with getting Atlas up and running. But I think now more and more different kinds of committees are using that, and there are different leaders, and they're just, I think, and having been a teacher myself, I understand this a bit, that they're just teachers who are much more natural long-term planners than others, and so knowing your staff and knowing who really has the strengths in curriculum writing and planning and kind of going to those people as your go-to, you know, giving them a bit more responsibility because of their interest in planning, but also as kind of the cheerleaders and the you know, here's how I use Atlas on a daily basis. Those kinds of kind of early adopters, big cheerleaders are certainly helpful in the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're,
oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add, we're also starting now knowing that, and kind of everybody was part of the heavy lift of getting everything in there. We're now kind of identifying those faculty on staff that are more of our curriculum leaders to do more of the work around revision and feedback and developing what our kind of cycle for those processes are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. A question came in about that first bullet on your slide, how you created a secure version of the map. How did you communicate that to the visiting team that they were going to be viewing it digitally without, like, what was that process like?
So we just created that and basically handed it to them saying, here is our curriculum map. And so they kind of never saw the depth and detail of the other back end. They saw this as our curriculum map. Not that we were hiding anything for, any reason at all, but just that we said, we have two co-chairs that are the leaders of those teams, and so we had conversations with them about the fact that we were going to be sharing everything digitally with them. So they relayed that to the team, and then we simply, when we sent the documents, sent links to that public-facing Atlas site. And so then they could kind of peruse that prior to coming and then had access to it to answer their specific questions as they went through their visit process while they were here.
Okay, so it was embedded in kind of your supporting documents that you submitted ahead of time, all the links.
We did. Mm-hmm. Yep, our body is really going to an all-digital process, and so we actually created, again, also a Google folder for all of the other documents, and then we're also able to put the link to Atlas in that as well.
Excellent. Great.
Okay, so I will continue on. And so really ways that Atlas was specifically part of our successful reaccreditation in terms of commendations and recommendations that we received. So you can read there how they actually specifically pointed out that our program was professionally executed with alignment and demonstrated flexibility and willingness to change. Is kind of as assistant head, the administrator in charge of this process, that made my heart feel good because that was exactly what we wanted them to see with the use of Atlas. And so that did actually feel reaffirming to those of us who were working so hard to create that consistency and coherency around the curriculum, but also I think reaffirmed for the teachers that there was a point to all of the work that we had done.
Did you share kind of some of that feedback with your whole staff, those commendations?
Yes. Yeah, so we've shared at several points along the way. We shared so the visiting team actually briefly reads their thoughts before they get back on their planes to go their separate ways, and so they heard it a bit there. And then when we have them specifically, they've seen this, but more importantly, they have heard it from me multiple times as we've started this fall through what we have put back into kind of parallel to our visit was also a strategic plan, kind of 2-year refresh of our goals. And so they've heard these exact words come into our goals for this year and next year in terms of continuing this process. So it also gave us great foundation to say, our work's not done with Atlas. We have a lot more we need to do, which leads into that recommendation that we did a lot of work around our 4 core content areas, but now kind of doing the same thing with all of our specialist areas, which were not quite as well developed on Atlas, and then some of our other programmatic philosophies around we have a strong focus on place-based learning and global competency and service. So how all of those things can be mapped out in terms of a scope and sequence of outcomes in those various areas and experiences in some ways that demonstrate a building of students' skills and understandings in those areas that are a little less concrete than your 4 core content areas.
A question came in. Do you feel like the commendations really helped cement mapping as an important part of your school's process for teachers?
I do. I think that both the commendations and the recommendations, because it came through, you've done a great job so far, but there's still more work to do. And so I think that also reaffirmed it as kind of a piece of our curriculum planning process that isn't going to go away and wasn't just an exercise that we were undergoing to be reaccredited, but that it was actually a process that is a best practice for good teaching and learning.
Yeah, I would say definitely big pat on the back there. That commendation is amazing. I can just imagine how wonderful you must have felt, and that really just speaks to your staff and the time that they put into having that articulated curriculum. So that's amazing. How just as I'm listening to you and looking at your recommendation, what is there going to be like a little subcommittee, or is it that self-study coordinator's job kind of after this point to really kind of brainstorm how we're going to, include that other curriculum, or what it's going to look like to map place-based learning? What's kind of the next steps there?
Yeah, well, the great thing was those were not surprises to us either. I think after going through the self-study and looking at these things, that was something that our self-study team, not just the coordinator, but the whole team really identified as where we needed to go next, because as we were writing and as we were going into Atlas, we weren't able to find that same kind of information in those areas, and so that was an automatic flag, which oftentimes the visiting teams like you to kind of pre-identify anyway.
Oh, okay.
And so it's really, so we have a committee structure here that we go through in our staff meetings, and so our curriculum committee is tasked this year with kind of analyzing what is there and developing a more set revision process for looking at curriculum in Atlas and identifying how it needs to be revised from a whole content perspective. And so this year we decided that we weren't going to do that with every subject all at one time again, that really and to kind of solve for getting everything in at one time, that we're going to take one subject area a year. And so we're still kind of building the plane around literacy and language arts, so that work is still happening. And then our committee is tasked with revising social studies, which has led to some really great conversations and revision kind of process in looking at that, which is really also taking a look at our standards and what we want our kids to be able to know and do in each of these content areas is kind of our driving question for creating a process to make that scope and sequence consistent and coherent in each content area. So this year we're taking on social studies. Next year my guess is we'll take on math and then probably move into science after that.
That definitely seems like a great approach, kind of one at a time. I know we hear a lot of schools who've had, who've successfully kind of gone that route as well. I guess one of the things I was just curious about from you is, now that you're at this reflective stage and kind of looking back on how you used Atlas to support this process, what worked well, do you have any, I guess, like tips or, something that you would share with a fellow administrator who's thinking about kind of embarking on this journey?
I mean, I think it's around a lot of the things we've talked about in terms of don't get discouraged and don't let teachers' anxiety around a mapping process stop you, because I think that if you can be their cheerleader and show them how they can use it, the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages of kind of undertaking this process. And I think what I said before too, we started it with enough time before our self-study kind of beginning and visit that we had so much in there, but don't bite off more than you can chew. Even if you're starting with kind of 1 or 2 major content areas for mapping first, showing that really well developed within a system like Atlas is, in my opinion, would be much more advantageous than, you know, pushing your teachers at a pace that is really unmanageable. Even for us, 2 years was pretty ambitious for the amount of content that went into Atlas that first time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I would add, too, that we would hope that any school who's thinking about doing this, just as you've done, Megan, and some of your colleagues, that you would engage with us and let us know that you're thinking about going down this path so that we can really help you, you know, help support this process, whether it's, you know, the little things that you've done, Megan, such as, you know, changing your template, creating that style guide so that when you do run reports and you're pulling that evidence for your accrediting body, that there is that consistency that you spoke about. You know, we want to support schools as they're gearing up for accreditation or reaccreditation, and you know, so hopefully a tip would be working with us just as you've done over the past few years, because we love to, you know, be a partner throughout this process.
No, and I know that you answered a lot of questions for our self-study coordinator and did provide that support along the way, which was very helpful in even helping us in a lot of ways conceptualize some of the things that we wound up doing in that public-facing map. Yeah, we work with a lot of schools that are going through, you know, accreditation and with various bodies, and so it's always great to see how, you know, one school approaches it, and it sounds like you guys have been very successful and are going to continue, you know, great work, really kind of reviewing and further mapping those content areas. So it sounds like, you know, very successful process. Yes, we're looking forward to some years here of quiet revision as we move forward.
Right, everybody can take a deep breath now.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I know that we will hang on the line. Megan, you mentioned that you'd be available for a few questions if anything comes in. But anything else that you wanna share as it relates to your accreditation process?
I don't think so. I think, you know, it was just so helpful to have something like this, especially as a newer administrator coming kind of into the middle of the process, and that, like I said, the gains of doing this far outweigh kind of the short-term pain that teachers tend to feel between time and work amount. So just stay strong and help your staff through it.
Lots of coffee and treats, right? Pastries in the staff room. Great. Well, Megan and I will stay on the line for everybody who's here. If you have specific questions, please do use that chat window. Again, it's in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Another thing that I wanted to share that I forgot to mention at the beginning, if you're interested in a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, please feel free to send me an email at pd@rubicon.com, and I can send you a certificate of attendance. I'm putting that in the chat window as well so everybody has access to that. Additionally, we will be writing a blog that will support this webinar, just kind of highlighting some of the great points that Megan shared today. And so we'll make sure to get that blog and the recording of today's webinar up on our website. So if you are interested in reading a little more or hearing this webinar again, we'll have that hosted on our website on rubicon.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today during your lunch hour if you're on the West Coast like we are. And we hope to see you at another webinar in the future.